Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me again tonight as we gently drift away from the noise of the present world and step into a quieter, softer place. A place wrapped in winter stillness, candlelight, and stories long buried beneath time. Tonight's journey begins with the hush of falling snow, the glow of lanterns trembling in the crisp night air, and the distant chime of bells that once rang softly across a land that did not yet know their meaning. Imagine for a moment the world of feudal Japan in winter samurai, walking along frost-covered paths, towns asleep under wooden roofs and mountain temples surrounded by forests whispering with cold wind. A world shaped by ancient tradition, discipline, and deep spiritual calm. Into this serene landscape came something utterly foreign. A small flicker of warmth carried across the seas. A festival born in faraway lands, filled with hymns, candles, and stories of hope. A festival that would for a brief moment mingle with the rhythm of a nation at war. Christmas arrived not with fanfare, but with gentle footsteps. Missionaries clutching handmade nativity icons, humble chapels lit by trembling flames, and villagers listening to melodies they had never heard before. Picture that first winter night, a tiny room built of cedar and bamboo, candlelight dancing on wooden walls, Latin hymns echoing softly as snow drifts outside, samurai standing silently at the doorway, unsure yet curious, their armor catching the glow of the candles. Japanese villagers sitting side by side, warmed by a story they didn't yet fully understand, a story of peace, humility, and new beginnings. This was the birth of Christmas in Japan. Not loud, not grand, but delicate quiet and breathtakingly human. A moment when two distant worlds touched in the heart of winter and created something unexpectedly beautiful. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let the warmth of this imagined night embrace you. Tonight, we rediscover a winter tale nearly forgotten, the first Christmas that ever bloomed on Japanese soil. A festival that shone briefly before being smothered by centuries of silence, yet continued to live on in secret, flickering like a single candle in the dark. As winter settled over the islands, the presence of these foreign visitors stirred both curiosity and wonder. In villages near the southern ports, people watched as missionaries prepared for a celebration no one in Japan had ever seen before. They gathered pine branches for decoration, lit candles that cast long, gentle shadows, and sang melodies that drifted through the night like warm breath in the cold air. To the Japanese, who quietly observed from the doorways of their homes, it was unlike anything they had known, a festival not rooted in ancient kami, not tied to the seasons or rice harvests, but in a distant story of a child born under a star. And yet something about it resonated, something about the light in the darkness. The message of peace in a time of endless battles felt strangely comforting. Over time, these foreign rituals mingled with Japanese sensibilities. Instead of ornate European decorations, simple nativity figures were carved from local wood, shaped with the soft, restrained lines of Japanese artistry. Hymns were sung with gentle cadence carried across courtyards and narrow streets. And in some homes, families who had recently accepted baptism would prepare small meals on Christmas Eve, a blend of Portuguese ingredients and Japanese traditions, creating a new kind of winter table that existed nowhere else in the world. For a brief generation, Christmas was not merely a foreign novelty. It became a moment of stillness in a raging era, a quiet celebration shared by fishermen, merchants, women, children, and even a handful of samurai, all searching for meaning amid the turmoil of the Sengoku Age. In a land dominated by steel loyalty and conflict, this gentle winter festival offered a glimpse of something softer, a reminder that even in war, people longed for peace. But as the festival's light slowly spread, so too did the shadows gathering around it. Japan's rulers, wary of foreign influence, began to see Christmas not as a harmless winter custom, but as the visible sign of a faith they feared could undermine the nation. Laws tightened, surveillance deepened, missionaries vanished one by one, and the candles that once glowed openly on Christmas Eve were forced behind closed doors. Yet the people did not forget. In remote villages, in coastal caves, in hidden rooms beneath wooden floorboards, Japan's earliest Christians continued to mark the holiday in secret. They whispered prayers that once echoed freely in chapels, humming faint traces of hymns remembered from childhood. They taught their children stories that had to survive without written words, passing them carefully from one winter to the next. With each generation, the celebration grew quieter, smaller, and more fragile, but it never fully disappeared. Christmas lived on, not as a public festival, but as a silent ember, protected by those who carried its memory in their hearts. And as the world continued to shift, and Japan eventually closed its doors to outsiders, few could have imagined that centuries later, that quiet ember would be allowed to burn again. That one day, the nation would reopen, and the festival long hidden in the shadows would step once more into the winter light. This is the unfolding story of Christmas in feudal Japan, a story not just of celebration and suppression, but of resilience, longing, and the extraordinary ways human hope survives even in the coldest of nights. If you enjoy deep dive historical stories like this one, make sure to like the video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of forgotten worlds and silent traditions. And as you do, imagine the soft glow of winter lanterns, the quiet rustle of snowfall outside, and the gentle ring of distant bells weaving their way into tonight's tale. Your support helps keep these rare stories alive. Stories wrapped in the warmth of candlelight stories that echo like carols carried across centuries. By subscribing, you help me continue exploring these forgotten winter moments. The secret celebrations, the hidden prayers, and the fragile sparks of hope that once flickered in the cold corners of feudal Japan. So, settle a little deeper into your seat. Let the calm of this winter night surround you, and allow the spirit of a Christmas long ago soft, distant, and beautifully human, to guide us into the heart of the story that waits ahead. Because what if I told you? There was a winter night when the scent of pine and burning candles mingled with the sharp smell of cold iron armor. A night when samurai hardened by years of conflict paused at the threshold of a humble chapel to listen to gentle hymns drifting into the snow-filled air. A night when villagers carried secret faith in their hearts, gathering in hidden mountain homes to whisper prayers they weren't allowed to speak aloud. There was a time when Christmas in Japan existed like a fragile snowflake, delicate, beautiful, and always at risk of melting under the heat of political fear. A festival banned for over 250 years, yet somehow kept alive by grandparents who taught their grandchildren stories in the dark, by mothers who preserved melodies and soft humming, and by communities who refused to let the winter light die. And what if the first Christmas in Japan was not just a celebration, but a quiet spark that illuminated the crossroads between two worlds? A moment when East met West, not through conquest or conflict, but through song warmth and shared human longing. A moment that forever altered Japan's identity, reshaping its diplomacy, its worldview, and the spiritual tapestry of its people. Tonight, we step into that forgotten winter, a winter where lanterns glowed beside makeshift candles, where joy and sorrow intertwined like branches in the cold wind, and where the soft radiance of Christmas shone only briefly before being swallowed by centuries of silence. But if you listen closely, if you let the snow settle and the world grow quiet, you can still hear it. The faint echo of a hymn carried across time. The memory of a festival that refused to die. And the gentle heartbeat of a story waiting to be rediscovered. Winter settled over the Heisen region of Kyushu, drawing a soft veil of silver across the mountains, the coastline, and the narrow roads that wound through villages touched by both trade and war. Snow drifted through the air like quiet confetti, piling gently on the old stone walls of Shimabara, a domain known for both its beauty and its scars. In this era, the Sengoku era, Japan was a land divided, constantly shifting, constantly bleeding. Clans fought for dominance, alliances were made and broken, like fragile ice, and villages lived in fear that tomorrow might bring a new ruler or a new battlefield. And yet, in the cold embrace of winter, even a fractured land felt strangely united by stillness. Inside a small fishing village near Nagasaki Bay, a young man named Haruto stepped outside his home, pulling his cloak tighter as the sea wind brushed past him. "It's colder than last year," he murmured. His younger sister Aki followed him, rubbing her hands together. "Mother says winters grow harsher when the land is restless." Haruto smiled faintly. "Then this winter must be very restless." Aki looked up at the sky, watching the snow swirl. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what, the snow. It falls like it's trying to tell us something." Haruto listened, though all he could hear was the gentle hush of winter sweeping across the bay. Far up the mountain path, in a small monastery, blanketed in white, the elderly monk Ryoshin swept snow from the temple steps. His apprentice Kaito shivered beside him. "Master, why do we sweep? It will only snow again." Ryoshin chuckled softly. "We sweep not to win against the snow, but to keep our hearts from growing lazy." Kaito stamped his feet. "My heart is freezing." "Then warm it," Ryoshin replied, tapping the boy's chest. "Winter reminds us of the warmth we've forgotten." The temple bell rang, a sound deep and calm, cutting through the cold like the voice of an ancient guardian. Down in Shimabara Castle, the atmosphere was different. The warlord Masayori. Takeda studied a map spread across his table, lit by a brazier glowing like an ember of defiance. "Borders have shifted again," his lieutenant said. "They shift like blown snow," Masayori muttered, "and as difficult to hold. Shall we march after the new year?" Masayori's stern eyes softened for a moment as he glanced toward the window where snowflakes danced slowly in the night air. "Even warriors," he said quietly, "deserve one night of peace." Outside the castle walls, a group of soldiers warmed themselves around a fire. "You ever wonder?" one of them murmured, "if somewhere far away, winter means something else?" "Like what?" another asked, chuckling. "I don't know. Celebration, maybe. Light, warmth." A third soldier shrugged. "In this land, winter is winter, hard and honest." The first soldier gazed into the flames, but still. Wouldn't it be nice if winter held some kind of miracle? The others fell silent, listening to the crackle of fire as the snow continued to fall. Across Kyushu, whispers of foreign visitors traveled on the wind. Strange ships with white sails had been sighted off the coast. Merchants spoke of unfamiliar customs, peculiar clothing, and words no one could understand. Some villagers feared it. Others were simply curious. In an old tea house overlooking the harbor, a traveling storyteller warmed his hands near a small lantern. "They say these foreigners bring wonders," he said softly to the small crowd. "Wonders," a fisherman scoffed. "More like trouble." "No," the storyteller replied, "stories, songs, maybe even blessings." A young woman leaned forward. "Blessings." In times like these, the storyteller lifted the lantern, letting its warm glow wash over his face. In times like these, he said, blessings matter most. Outside, snowflakes continued to fall, glimmering like stars, descended from the heavens. This was Japan, on the eve of something unexpected. A land exhausted by conflict, longing without realizing it, for warmth, for stillness, for a bit of magic in the cold. No one in Heizen Shimabara or Nagasaki knew that across the sea, in the hearts of strangers approaching their shores, there was a winter tale of hope waiting to be shared. A tale of light carried into darkness. A tale sung in cold nights. A tale that would soon drift into Japan like a distant melody carried on winter wind. A tale that the world called Christmas. And the first spark of it was already drawing near. Winter in Heizen was never gentle, But in the years of ceaseless conflict, it felt harsher than ever. Villages that once thrived on trade now survived on rationed rice and thin soups. Fields lay barren after soldiers marched across them, leaving only broken fences and silent scarecrows bent beneath the weight of snow. In Haruto and Aki's village, mornings began before dawn. The family gathered around a small fire, its flame trembling against the cold drafts that slipped through the wooden walls. "We don't have enough wood for the whole week," their mother whispered as she fed a thin branch into the fire. Aki hugged her knees. "Should we ask the neighbors?" "No," Haruto said softly. "They have even less than we do." Even so, their mother smiled a small, warm smile that felt like a candle flickering in a storm. "We will manage," she said. "Winter always tests us, but it never defeats us." Outside, the village moved slowly, as if the cold itself weighed down every step. The fish market had only 2 stalls left. The fishermen had lost boats to storms or to soldiers requisitioning them for transport. The pottery workshop stood silent clay, could not be dug from frozen earth. And the once busy shrine path was empty footprints covered by the fresh fall of snow. Yet even in scarcity, life persisted. Children gathered near the old camphor tree, cupping their hands around the tiny snow lanterns they built with great care. "Look," one child whispered. "If you hold your breath, the flame inside looks like it's dancing." Another giggled. "It's like a little spirit glowing in the cold." The adults watched them with soft eyes, knowing that in uncertain times, small lights mattered more than they used to. In Shimabara Castle, too, scarcity shaped daily routines. Servants rationed rice for soldiers. Kitchen fires burned low to save wood. Even the Lord Masayori Takeda held shorter meetings to conserve oil for lamps. As his attendants laid out simple meals, he sighed. "This land is weary," he murmured. His steward bowed. "The people endure because they must." Masayori looked toward the snowy courtyard. "No, they endure because they hope." Down at the monastery, Kaito trudged through the snow with a bucket in each hand. "Master," he groaned, "the well is almost frozen. If the water runs out, Ryoshin cut him off gently. Fear does nothing. Breathe. Listen to what? The winter." Kaito frowned. "Winter doesn't speak." The old monk smiled. "It speaks to those who listen. It tells us that even in the coldest times there is beauty." "Look." Kaito paused. Snowflakes drifted around him, glowing faintly in the pale morning light. "They look like tiny lanterns," he whispered. "Everything in winter tries to shine," Ryoshin said softly, "even the snow. But beneath this fragile beauty lay danger. Political tension hung in the air like an unseen frost. Messengers rode through the region daily with urgent scrolls, alliances changing borders, redrawn, new taxes imposed, old ones suddenly enforced. Villagers whispered at night, wondering which army might arrive next and what it might take. "Should we flee?" a farmer asked another as they repaired a broken wall. "And go where? Anywhere but here." His companion shook his head. "War finds you no matter where you go. Better to stay with the people you know, and the walls that still stand." Despite exhaustion, the people of Kyushu clung to small rituals, polishing family heirlooms, lighting incense at dusk, sharing the last handfuls of dried fish. These gestures, humble as they were stitched, a thin thread of hope through the fabric of chaos. And perhaps because winter was so cold, the warmth people shared felt even brighter. A steaming bowl of soup offered to a neighbor, a hastily patched cloak given to someone shivering, a child's mitten repaired under candlelight. Little acts of kindness, tiny sparks flickered through the villages like scattered embers. Uncertainty was constant. Hunger was familiar. Fear was close. But so too was the quiet determination to survive and the quiet wish for something more. Something like warmth, something like light, something like a winter miracle. None of them knew it yet, but beyond the horizon, on ships cutting through the icy waves toward Nagasaki, a new story of winter, a story of candles and hymns and hope was slowly drawing near. Across the Heisen region of Kyushu, long before any foreign hymn touched Japanese shores, the spiritual life of the people followed paths as old as the mountains themselves. Winter especially was a season when beliefs deepened, when the quiet of snow brought the sacred closer to the human heart. Buddhist temples sat on high ridges, their roofs heavy with snow, their halls filled with the soft scent of incense. Inside, monks chanted sutras rhythmically, their voices rising and falling like waves in a calm sea. The chants echoed through the wooden beams, drifting out into the frosty air as if carrying prayers for peace in a land that seldom knew it. In one such temple, Ryoshin lit a lantern near the altar. Kaito watched the flame flicker. "Master, does the light mean anything special in winter?" Ryoshin nodded. "Winter is a season of reflection. Light reminds us that even in the coldest nights, understanding still burns. And if the light goes out, then we light it again," the monk said gently. "As many times as it takes." Down in the forests and riverside shrines, Shinto priests tended sacred groves blanketed in snow. Wind chimes hung from ancient torii gates, ringing softly with each passing breeze. Offerings of rice and evergreen branches lay before the kami, their green leaves standing out like small tokens of hope against the white landscape. At a small shrine near Haruto's village, an elderly priest brushed the snow from the stone fox statues. Aki approached timidly. "Will the kami hear us even in winter?" The priest smiled. "Winter is when they hear us most clearly. The world is quiet, and our hearts speak louder." Aki looked at the tiny lantern hanging from the shrine gate. "It looks like it's glowing warmer than usual." "That is because you want warmth," the priest replied. "And winter has a way of answering honest wishes." Among warriors, another kind of spirituality shaped their actions, the unspoken code of loyalty, duty, and honor. Cold stone dojos echoed with the sound of bamboo swords, clashing even as frost formed on their wooden floors. The samurai lived by principles as firm as iron: protect one's lord, defend one's land, uphold one's family name. And yet even they found a certain stillness in winter. One evening, in the courtyard, of Shimabara Castle, two young samurai practiced under falling snow. "Your stance is too rigid," one said. "It's the cold," the other replied, tightening his grip. "My hands feel like stone. A warrior must stand firm even in winter." A moment passed. Then the first samurai quietly added, "But even warriors long for warmth." Their sparring slowed, replaced by a shared silence as they watched snowflakes gather on their sleeves. Across the land, people balanced these three paths: Buddhist introspection, Shinto reverence for nature, and the stern but honorable heart of the warrior. Each tradition offered guidance in the harsh cold of the Sengoku winter. Buddhism taught endurance. Shinto taught gratitude. The warrior code taught resilience. Together they shaped a spiritual world that felt both fragile and unshakable, a world built on rituals that brought comfort to weary souls. In every temple bell, every shrine lantern, every bow exchanged between samurai, there was a quiet wish for balance in a land where balance was rare. But as serene as these traditions seemed, they were also rooted deeply in Japan's soil, so deeply that few imagined anything foreign could ever take root beside them. After all, who would expect new prayers to appear in a land already rich with its own? Who would imagine that winter lanterns might someday hang beside foreign candles? Or that voices accustomed to sutras and Shinto chants might one day hear unfamiliar hymns drifting across the sea? Japan's spiritual landscape was complete, or so it seemed. When the world felt chaotic, people turned to what they had always known. And in that quiet turning, few realized that something new, something gentle, warm, and filled with light, was already making its way toward them. Something that would not replace their beliefs, but brush softly against them, like snow touching a lantern flame. A story, not from their mountains, their kami, or their warriors, but from a faraway land carried across winter waves. A story called Christmas Still Unseen, but soon to arrive. Before any foreign sails touch the shores of Kyushu, winter in Japan unfolded in ways shaped by centuries of tradition, silence, and reverence. It was a season marked not by grand festivals or foreign customs, but by the slow rhythm of nature, by small rituals of survival, and by moments of quiet beauty treasured amid the cold. In early morning frost, villagers stepped outside to sweep their paths with bamboo brooms, their breaths rising like pale smoke into the crisp air. Snow clung to the sleeves of their kimono, turning the fabric stiff and cold. Yet they worked patiently, each stroke of the broom a gesture of dignity even in hardship. Inside Haruto and Aki's home, the hearth was the heart of winter life. Aki poked the embers with a metal rod. "It's fading again." Haruto crouched beside her. "Feed it gently. Too much wood, and it'll burn too fast." Their mother smiled from the corner as she folded spare blankets. "A winter fire is like a guest. You keep it warm, and it keeps you warm." The family gathered around the hearth, not only to eat, but to talk, to repair tools, to hum lullabies that drifted through the dimly lit room. These songs had no foreign origin. They were as old as the land itself, melodies about snow spirits, winter foxes, and mountains that whispered secrets into the wind. Evenings were quieter still. Lanterns glowed with soft amber light hanging from wooden beams and shimmering against paper walls. Aki often stopped to stare at them. "They look like stars," she whispered. "Stars don't melt." Haruto teased, brushing snow from her shoulder. "But these don't melt either," Aki insisted. "They glow even when the world outside feels frozen." Villagers used whatever they had to brighten the winter nights: small pine branches placed on doorsteps, tiny clay bowls filled with oil for lamps, and snow lanterns sculpted with careful hands. These lanterns, Yukidoro, flickered gently in the dark, turning snowy paths into rivers of soft light. On the mountain temple grounds, winter brought rituals of purification. Monk Ryoshin lifted a ladle of icy water and poured it over his hands. Kaido winced. "Does it have to be this cold?" Ryoshin chuckled. "Winter teaches humility. It reminds us that life is a balance between warmth and cold, comfort and effort." Kaido pulled his sleeves closer. "I prefer warmth, and that," Ryoshin said softly, "is why winter is so precious. Without the cold, we would never appreciate light." Villagers visited shrines with offerings of rice sake and evergreen sprigs, the only green life in a world of white. The evergreen branches symbolized endurance, strength, and hope. Children tied strips of paper with prayers onto the shrine trees, their wishes fluttering like tiny white wings in the winter breeze. In some remote valleys, winter was also a time for storytelling. Elders gathered the young around glowing charcoal braziers and spoke of ancient spirits who guided travelers through snowstorms, or of celestial visitors who protected households during the coldest nights. "Are they real?" a child once asked. The old man chuckled. "Real, real enough to live in your heart if you let them." And so, winter was not merely endured, it was honored. Winter meals were humble, but comforting miso soup, simmering with root vegetables dried. Persimmons hung like jewels from the eaves, and warm rice balls shared among neighbors. Each household contributed something small to others, a practice born from necessity, but carried with kindness. In this world, winter brought both hardship and harmony. The cold tested the body. The stillness awakened the spirit. And the light, whether from lanterns, hearths, or the moon, reflected in snow, symbolized something quietly sacred. Long before any Christmas candle glowed in Japan, winter was already a season of intimate warmth, silent hope, and small miracles. Miracles found in the glow of a lantern, the crunch of snow underfoot, the laughter of siblings around a fire, the chanting of monks drifting into the night, and the steady heartbeat of a community surviving the dark together. None knew it then, but these traditions, these small acts of light in cold darkness, would one day blend seamlessly with a new winter story arriving from far beyond the sea. A story that carried its own light, its own warmth, its own promise. And when Christmas finally reached these shores, it found a land already prepared for it, a land that understood, perhaps better than it realized, the meaning of light in the deepest winter. Winter storms rolled across the Nagasaki coastline, the sea churning like a restless creature beneath gray skies. Fishermen along the bay tightened their ropes, secured their nets, and whispered prayers to the kami of the sea, hoping the violent waves would calm by morning. But on one particular winter afternoon in 1543, as mist clung to the water and snow began to fall in soft spirals, the lookout on a rocky cliff shouted down toward the village. A strange ship. There beyond the fog, Haruto, who had been mending nets with his father, looked up sharply. Another clan's vessel. His father squinted. No, the sails are wrong. Too white, too tall. Aki tugged at Haruto's sleeve. It looks like a ghost ship. Maybe Haruto murmured, unable to look away. Or maybe something else. The villagers gathered at the shore, some anxious, others curious. The ship approached slowly, rocking heavily as the winter wind whipped around its foreign masts. No one in the village had ever seen anything like it, not even the oldest fisherman whose wrinkles held decades of sea stories. When the ship finally anchored, strange men stepped onto a makeshift landing platform. Their clothing was thick and layered in ways unfamiliar to Japanese eyes. Their hair was lighter, their gestures animated. They spoke in sounds that felt like tumbling stones, impossible to understand. "Who are they?" a villager whispered. "Foreigners," another replied. "From lands beyond the horizon." Haruto leaned toward Aki and whispered, "It's like winter brought us visitors from another world." As the Portuguese traders tried to communicate, confusion filled the air. One of them tapped his chest and repeated a word slowly. "Portugaru, Portugaru." Villagers tilted their heads. Another foreigner pulled out a small metal object, a firearm decorated and polished, and fired it into the air. The blast echoed across the bay like thunder. Aki screamed, covering her ears. Even Haruto stumbled back. "What kind of magic is that?" his father whispered. "It's power, a new kind of power." And just like that, curiosity overcame fear. The Portuguese set up camp near the harbor. They opened crates filled with unfamiliar goods, velvet fabrics, tiny bells, spices that perfumed the cold air, and wooden carvings of a child sleeping in a manger. The villagers had never seen such items. Every object felt like a fragment of another world. One evening, during heavy snowfall, a Portuguese trader picked up a strange stringed instrument and played a soft, lilting melody. The notes drifted across the harbor, mingling with the wind, like foreign snowflakes joining the Japanese winter. Children gathered first, then adults. Even Aki, shivering under her scarf, whispered, "It sounds warm." Haruto nodded, and sad at the same time. Years passed, and in 1549, another ship arrived, smaller, humbler, carrying a different kind of foreigner. Francis Xavier, a Jesuit priest, stepped onto Japanese soil with a determined gaze and a heart full of mission. Snow fell quietly as he approached the villagers, holding a small wooden cross close to his chest. He bowed awkwardly in an attempt to imitate Japanese manners and greeted them with halting words. "Kon, Nichi, wa." The villagers blinked. Kaito, who had come down from the monastery to witness the arrival, whispered, He's trying to speak our language." Ryoshin stroked his beard. "A good sign. It means he wishes to understand, not conquer." Xavier smiled gently and began showing the villagers simple drawings, stories of a child born under a star of shepherds, guided by light of a winter night filled with angel songs. His gestures were kind, and though few understood his words, something about the way he spoke felt sincere. Haruto watched from a distance. "What do you think he wants?" a fisherman replied. "To teach us his beliefs." "And do we want to learn?" The fisherman shrugged. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, but also a beautiful one." As weeks passed, villagers grew more comfortable. Xavier learned more Japanese words, and the people learned bits of Portuguese. The early conversations were clumsy, but full of warmth. "Watashi, Xavier," he said, tapping his chest. Aki giggled. "You said it wrong." Xavier laughed, with her repeating the phrase until he got it right. For the first time, Japan heard foreign preaching. But it came softly, not with force, but with stories. Stories of compassion, forgiveness, and humility. In winter gatherings, Xavier lit candles whose flames glowed like tiny stars against the wooden walls of fishermen's homes. Some villagers felt stirred by the message. Others were confused, others cautious. But everyone agreed on one thing. This new winter light felt different. Not Japanese, not familiar, but strangely comforting in its quiet glow. One evening, as villagers walked home through the falling snow, Haruto whispered to his sister Aki, "Do you think these foreigners celebrate winter differently?" She nodded. Their lanterns seemed brighter, their music warmer. Haruto watched a lone candle flickering in Xavier's hands as the priest prayed. Maybe he said softly, maybe they brought their own winter with them. And without realizing it, the first seeds of something new, something gentle, warm, and full of light began to take root in the cold soil of Kyushu. Japan didn't yet know the word for it. But in Xavier's stories, in the bells the Portuguese traders hung by the harbor, and in the melodies that drifted through snowy nights, the earliest echoes of Christmas had begun to whisper across the land. Winter deepened across Kyushu, covering the hills of Nagasaki, Hirado, Yamaguchi, with layers of soft snow that glittered beneath the pale sunlight. It was in this cold but fertile land that the seeds of a new faith began to take root, small, fragile sprouts of belief, nourished by curiosity trade and the unexpected openness of certain wise daimyo. Kyushu had always been different from the rest of Japan. Facing the open seas, it breathed foreign winds more often than any other region. Merchant ships came and went, carrying tales, spices, fabrics, and new ideas. Its harbors were gateways, not walls. This made Kyushu fertile soil for something unfamiliar. In Nagasaki, the young villager Haruto continued to watch the foreign priests with quiet fascination. The villagers gathered around these newcomers, partly because winter left them hungry for stories, and partly because Kyushu's people had always been more welcoming, shaped by centuries of contact with traders from China and Korea. One evening, as the snow fell in gentle spirals, Haruto approached monk Ryoshin outside the temple. "Master," He asked, "Why does this new teaching spread so quickly?" "Here?" Ryoshin smiled knowingly, brushing frost from his sleeves. "Because Kyushu is a door Haruto, and doors open more easily than walls. Down in Yamaguchi, the winds of change were blowing too. The daimyo of the region, impressed by the foreigners' knowledge, their maps, medicines, and strange instruments allowed the Jesuits to build small places of worship. These were simple structures, at first wooden chapels, with thatched roofs standing humbly beside shrines that had been there for centuries. But inside these chapels, something extraordinary unfolded. Aki sat on a wooden bench, her breath visible in the cold air. She watched as Francis Xavier gently placed a small bell on the altar. "What is that for?" she asked in a whisper. Xavier smiled. "To call the heart, to call the people, to call God closer." Aki blinked. "You can call him only with sincerity," Xavier said, touching his hand to his chest, "and with love." Behind them, Haruto listened, unsure what to make of these new teachings. But the warmth in Xavier's voice felt familiar, like a father telling a bedtime story during a long winter night. As the Jesuits traveled between Yamaguchi, Hirado, and Nagasaki, they met daimyo who were surprisingly receptive. Some, like Omura Sumatada, saw political advantages, alliances trade better access to firearms. Others were genuinely drawn to the gentleness of the foreign teachings, to the compassion woven into every story. One snowy morning, a small group of villagers gathered at a new chapel in Hirado. The walls were simple, the floor cold, but candles flickered warmly at the front, casting golden light on the faces of the curious. Xavier held up a scroll, painted with unfamiliar images. A mother holding a child beneath a bright star. This, he explained slowly in broken Japanese, is the story of a birth of hope. A fisherman raised his hand timidly. "Why a star?" Xavier lifted his eyes toward the rafters. "In winter," he said softly, "the sky is darker, so the light must shine brighter." The villagers murmured in agreement. They understood that truth very well. In Nagasaki, the first tiny communities formed small gatherings of locals who met quietly to learn prayers. Xavier and his companions would repeat phrases slowly, letting the villagers echo them until the words settled into memory. Kirishitan Aki whispered one night beside the fire, practicing the foreign word. Haruto frowned. "Are you thinking of joining them?" Aki shrugged. "I don't know, but their songs, they feel warm, like the lanterns on winter nights." Haruto looked out at the snowy path, winding toward the new chapel. Maybe warmth is enough reason for some people. As weeks passed, hymns began drifting through Kyushu's wintry nights. The melodies were simple, even clumsy in Japanese accents, but they carried a gentle magic. Villagers hummed them while tending fires. Monks paused to listen as they echoed up the mountains, and wandering merchants found themselves strangely soothed by the foreign tunes. One snowy evening, Kaito approached Ryoshin as they walked along the temple grounds. "Master, do you think these new teachings will replace ours?" Ryoshin chuckled softly. "No, child. New snow does not replace the old earth beneath it. It simply reminds us how many layers the world can hold." Winter passed slowly that year, each day, carrying more whispers of this foreign faith. And though many still hesitated, the first seeds had already sprouted in the villages, in the harbors, in the hearts of those who longed for warmth in a season of cold and war. Tiny chapels stood as islands of light in the Kyushu night. Voices practiced prayers with awkward sincerity. Lanterns glowed outside wooden homes where villagers repeated stories of stars, shepherds, and a child born far away. No one could yet imagine what these seeds would grow into. But in the stillness of that winter, the foundations of Japan's first Christmas were quietly being laid, not with grandeur, not with force, but with songs, candlelight, and the gentle curiosity of a people longing for hope. That winter, Kyushu lay under a soft blanket of snow, quiet and expectant, as though the land itself sensed that something unusual was about to happen. In the small fishing villages near Nagasaki Bay, villagers whispered about gatherings in the new wooden chapel. Gatherings illuminated not by lantern oil alone, but by a kind of light they had never felt before. It was the night of Japan's first Christmas Mass. The chapel, nothing more than a cedar hut with a thatched roof, glowed softly from within. Thin smoke drifted from a small chimney, and warm golden light shimmered through paper windows. Outside, snowflakes fell slowly swirling like tiny sacred spirits called by the foreign songs. Haruto Aki and half the village trudged quietly through the snow, drawn not by obligation, but by curiosity and by the promise of warmth. Aki tugged at Haruto's sleeve. "Do you think they'll tell more stories tonight?" Haruto smiled. "Maybe, and maybe they'll sing again." When they stepped inside, their breath caught. Dozens of candles flickered on wooden stands. Their flames reflected off the smooth, handmade nativity figures, tiny sculptures carved by local artisans under Jesuit guidance. But they possessed a distinct Japanese elegance. Soft lines, gentle expressions, robes shaped like flowing kimono. Even the tiny baby figure rested in a woven basket that looked unmistakably Japanese, filled with rice straw instead of hay. A villager whispered behind them, "It looks familiar, but different, like our world dressed in foreign dreams." Another murmured, "A child born in winter. Maybe winter always brings something sacred." Francis Xavier stood before the small altar, his face illuminated by a candle glow. He smiled as the villagers settled onto benches, and the cold slowly melted from their cheeks and fingers. "Kono yoru wa," he said in careful Japanese, pausing as the villagers leaned closer. "Heiwa no yoru desu. This night is a night of peace." He stepped aside, and one of the Jesuit brothers lifted a small book and began singing a Latin hymn, each syllable pronounced slowly so the villagers could follow. "Gloria in excelsis Deo." The Latin words were foreign, but their rhythm was gentle, like waves brushing a winter shore. Xavier motioned for the villagers to repeat after him, slowly, awkwardly, but earnestly. "Glow, re, exu, ches, shi, de, o." Aki giggled on the first attempt, covering her mouth. Xavier laughed softly too. It's all right. Even we learn slowly. Haruto whispered, "Try again." She nodded, her eyes bright. This time her voice wove neatly into the others, creating a fragile but beautiful harmony. As the hymn continued, Kaito and the old monk Ryoshin listened from a corner, their hands folded politely. Kaito whispered, "The words don't make sense yet, but the feeling does." Ryoshin nodded. "Language is only a door. Tonight, we see what lies behind it." When Xavier began recounting the nativity story, he used gestures and simple phrases. He pointed to the wooden star carved above the altar. A star, he said in Japanese, guiding people through darkness. He pointed to the small figure of Mary, a mother who protects, then to the child, a hope born in winter. A hush fell over the room. Even the candles seemed to burn quieter. After the mass ended, the villagers followed the Jesuits outside to a shared meal laid out under a canvas shelter. Snow gently dusted the wooden tables, but the air was filled with warm scents. There were Portuguese sweets, small honey cakes called bolo fried dough, dusted with sugar, and a simple egg custard that shimmered like golden winter sunrise. It tastes like sweetness, trapped in the cold, Aki whispered after her first bite. Beside them were familiar dishes, rice balls with dried fish, steaming miso broth, and roasted chestnuts. Haruto took a bite of the foreign cake and raised an eyebrow. "It's strange. Strange good?" Aki asked. Haruto laughed. "Strange and good." Nearby, Xavier watched the villagers enjoy the feast. A fisherman approached him hesitantly. "Father, why do you celebrate this day?" Xavier touched his chest gently. "Because it is the night hope was born. And this child, will he help us? Not with swords," Xavier said softly, but with heart. The fisherman stared at the glowing lanterns, then nodded. In winter, the heart needs help. As the night deepened, villagers began humming the Latin hymn they had learned. Their voices drifted into the snowy dark, blending with the whisper of winter wind and the distant crash of the sea. For a brief moment, Kyushu felt wrapped in something soft and luminous. Not peace exactly, but the dream of peace. Haruto looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Maybe this is what warmth feels like. Even when the world outside is still cold." Aki leaned on his arm. "Do you think we'll celebrate this again next winter?" Haruto hesitated. "I don't know, but I hope so." No one in that small chapel, not Xavier, not the villagers, not the monks, realized that they had just lived through a moment that would echo through time. A first Christmas. A quiet spark in a war-torn country. A miracle of light in the deep Japanese winter. Winter settled deeply across Kyushu, and with it came an unexpected shift in the political winds. Not all lords feared the foreign teachings. Some remarkably welcomed them. Among these rare figures were Omura Sumitada of the Omura domain and Otomo Soren, the influential daimyo of Bungo. Both men were known for their curiosity, their appetite for knowledge, and their bold willingness to invite new ideas into their lands. In a country torn by endless conflict, such openness was both unusual and quietly revolutionary. And because of these men, Christmas, still strange, still new, found room to breathe. Snow was falling softly outside the gates of Omura Castle when Haruto and Aki stood among a group of villagers waiting to enter. Soldiers in lamellar armor guided people in with polite but firm gestures. The castle courtyard, usually a place of drills and tense discussions, now glowed with lanterns hanging from every eave. Aki whispered, "Are we really allowed to go inside? A castle?" Haruto nodded nervously. Lord Sumatada invited everyone. He wants to hear the foreign hymns himself. Inside, the great hall had been cleared of tatami mats and decorated with both Japanese and foreign motifs. Pine branches hung in thick bundles along the walls, while small wooden carvings of the Nativity made by local craftsmen rested on lacquered stands. Candles glowed everywhere, their light shimmering like fallen stars brought indoors. Samurai walked among the villagers, their armor-polished swords sheathed expressions curious but guarded. One samurai murmured to another, "They say the foreigners teach music. Even warriors have never heard." "A strange thing," the other replied. "Music that comes from across the world. Do you believe it?" The samurai shrugged. "I believe what I see, and tonight I will see." As the hall filled, Omura Sumatada stepped onto the raised platform. He wore a simple but dignified winter kimono, his face lit by candlelight. "Tonight," he announced calmly, "we gather not for war, but for wonder." Whispers rippled through the audience. Then the doors opened, and Francis Xavier's companions entered, followed by a group of Japanese boys and girls from the newly opened mission school. Each child held a small metal bell or a wooden instrument crafted by local carpenters under Jesuit instruction. The first notes began softly. It was a hymn they had been practicing for weeks, Gloria in Excelsi Deo. The children sang in careful Latin, their voices pure trembling slightly with nervousness. The samurai straightened, surprised. They had expected something alien, jarring. Instead, the music felt like a warm breeze stirring through the cold hall. A warrior near Haruto whispered, "It's peaceful." Another nodded slowly. "It feels like winter speaking." Xavier raised his hands, gently guiding the choir. The foreign melody wove through the air, wrapping itself around the wooden beams, gliding over the polished floors, and settling like a soft glow in every listener's chest. Aki leaned close to Haruto. "I didn't know voices could shine like light." Haruto swallowed, eyes glistening. "I didn't know winter could sound like this." Omura Sumatada listened with deep concentration. When the hymn ended, he approached Xavier. "You have brought something rare," he said quietly. "Something my people have never heard." Xavier bowed. "It is a gift we share with humility, my lord." Sumatada nodded. "Then share it freely. Let my land learn this hope." And he meant it. Under his protection, the Jesuits established more mission schools where Japanese students learned to read scripture craft instruments and sing hymns in Latin, Portuguese, and their native tongue. Some samurai curious and ambitious attended these lessons not to convert, but to observe, to understand, to learn something their rivals did not yet grasp. At Bungo, under Otomo, Soren, even more astonishing scenes unfolded. During one winter evening, Soren himself walked into a chapel, his retinue stepping aside as he approached the altar. "Is this," he asked, "the festival of your god?" Xavier bowed. "Yes, my lord." Soren studied the nativity figure, then the flickering candles. "It is gentle." "Yes," Xavier replied, "gentle, but enduring." Soren stared into the candlelight and whispered, "In a land torn by steel, perhaps we need something gentle." His samurai looked at one another, surprised by their lord's words. In celebration of the event, a feast was prepared, an unusual blend of cultures. Portuguese bolo cakes beside steamed rice, dried fish served with foreign spices, Japanese sag poured next to sweet imported wine, roasted chestnuts beside almond sweets. Aki bit into a foreign pastry and sighed. "It's so sweet." Haruto laughed. "Careful, you'll melt like snow." Nearby, a samurai tasted the custard and frowned. "It's too soft." Another samurai smirked. "But you ate it all." Because I was making sure, laughter rippled through the hall, rare, light-hearted, sincerely shared. For one night, the weight of war receded. Samurai relaxed. Villagers smiled. Candlelight danced. And Christmas, quiet foreign, but undeniably warm, flourished like an early blossom in winter. As Haruto stepped outside into the chilled night, he gazed at the stars glittering above the castle roofs. "Do you think this will last?" he asked. A passing samurai, overhearing him, paused. "For now," the samurai replied gently, "we have light. Winter always begins with darkness, but it never ends there." Haruto nodded, feeling the truth in the samurai's voice. No one knew that the peace was temporary. No one foresaw the storms approaching. For now, Kyushu glowed with candles, with song, with laughter, with hope. Christmas, for a brief, precious moment, had found a home among warriors. Winter rolled across the central plains of Japan, frosting the tiled roofs of Kyoto, dusting the wide roads leading to Gifu Castle, and settling in soft layers around villages that had only recently found calm under a new rising power. That power belonged to Oda Nobunaga, a man as fierce as fire, as unpredictable as winter storms, and yet remarkably a leader who saw value where others saw only strangeness. While many daimyo eyed the arrival of Westerners with suspicion, Nobunaga watched them with a calculating curiosity. In the cold months of the late 1560s, Portuguese traders and Jesuit missionaries reached Kyoto, carrying not only books, maps, and musical instruments, but knowledge that intrigued Nobunaga deeply. More than once, he invited missionaries to demonstrate their weapons, the arquebus, the foreign firearms that could transform the battlefield. One snowy afternoon, Nobunaga stood at the training grounds behind Gifu Castle, watching a Jesuit brother demonstrate how to load and fire the weapon. The gun's thunderous sound echoed across the mountains. A samurai retainer whispered, "My lord, do you trust these foreigners?" Nobunaga's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "I trust their usefulness," he replied. "And their teachings?" Nobunaga smirked. "Teachings are wind, weapons are steel." Yet despite this practical mindset, Nobunaga was no simple warlord. He admired intelligence, skill, and beauty in whatever form he found them. As winter deepened, He allowed Jesuit missionaries to build chapels near Kyoto. He invited Western scholars to demonstrate their instruments and maps. He tasted foreign sweets with amused curiosity. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, he permitted the missionaries to celebrate Christmas openly within his territories. This was unheard of in most of Japan, but Nobunaga did not follow the patterns of others. One winter evening, Haruto Aki and Kaito arrived in Kyoto as part of a small group of Kyushu villagers, brought by Jesuits to witness the new chapels established under Nobunaga's rule. Snowflakes swept through the streets, catching the flickering light of lanterns. Kyoto felt like a vast, glittering universe compared to their small fishing villages. Brother Aki whispered excitedly, "Look at all the shops, the fabrics, the colors." Haruto smiled. "Even the snow feels different here, like it falls slower." Near the center of the city, a newly built chapel glowed with candles. Outside, samurai guards stood watch, but their expressions were calm, even respectful. Inside, villagers, merchants, monks, and samurai gathered together, a mixture no one thought possible. Some came out of curiosity, others for the beauty of the foreign music, and a few, surprisingly, for sincere faith. The Jesuit choir began a hymn, accompanied by an organ carried over from Portugal. The warm tones filled the wooden hall, sounding like 1,000 bells humming in harmony. A young samurai murmured to his companion, "Music like this, it feels like it reaches beyond the winter sky." His companion nodded. "It feels like light." In the front row, Nobunaga himself sat quietly, his expression unreadable. But as the hymn rose, candles flickering in its pulse, even he seemed touched by something softer than steel. He leaned to his retainer. "Tell me," Nobunaga whispered, "is it not remarkable that voices alone can move an army of hearts?" The retainer bowed. "Indeed, my lord." After the Mass, Nobunaga allowed a grand winter feast, one blending European and Japanese traditions in ways no one had imagined. Tables were covered with Portuguese confeito, bolo de mel mixed with Japanese chestnut paste, silk fabrics dyed in deep winter reds and greens, decorative lanterns crafted from European glass and Japanese bamboo, exquisite Portuguese bells that chimed softly in the breeze. Aki picked up a shimmering blue fabric. "It's like the night sky," she gasped. Kaito held a small bell, and this, like a star's voice. Haruto watched Nobunaga walk through the hall, speaking with foreign traders. What is he asking? Kaito listened closely. He asks not about God, but about ships' roads and trade routes. Aki frowned. So, he doesn't care about Christmas? Haruto shook his head. No, he cares, but in his own way. Indeed, Nobunaga cared for Christmas not as a religious symbol, but as a bridge to knowledge, a bridge to the world, a bridge to power. And because of that, Christmas briefly became an almost public celebration in his land. Children played small drums taught by Jesuit musicians. Villagers sang hymns in winter markets. Nobunaga even allowed the hanging of decorative stars outside some chapels, fragile symbols of hope glimmering against the cold night air. "Do you think this will spread?" Aki asked as they walked through snowy Kyoto streets. Kaito nodded. "If Lord Nobunaga wills it, it will spread far." Haruto looked up at the candles glowing through chapel windows. "And if he changes his mind?" Kaito looked at the snow, suddenly aware of how easily it melted. "Then the light may fade. But for now, for this one winter Christmas, shone brighter than anyone had imagined possible. Not because of faith alone, not because of miracles, but because even the fiercest lord in Japan recognized the value of light in the darkness. In Nobunaga's winter, under his bold and watching eyes, Christmas flourished as a symbol of curiosity, diplomacy, and quiet wonder. Winter returned to Kyushu like a familiar friend. But this time, its breath felt colder, sharper, carrying with it a quiet unease that people could not yet name. Snow still fell over Nagasaki's rooftops, still clung to the pine branches outside. Mission schools still drifted through chapel windows during hymns. But something was different. The songs were sung more softly. The candles were lit more cautiously. The bells chimed, but villagers listened for footsteps between each ring. Because far away in Kyoto, a new power had risen, one whose gaze was far more suspicious. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the brilliant general who succeeded Nobunaga, began his rule with tolerance. At first, he welcomed foreigners and praised their intelligence. He even received Jesuits with polite curiosity, touching their fabrics, admiring their clocks, and tasting their strange sweets. But as reports from overseas reached him, stories of European colonization in distant lands, his expression hardened. In winter, councils surrounded by maps of Japan and scrolls marked with clan alliances, Hideyoshi spoke with growing fear. They conquered other nations through missions. First, he muttered to his advisors, a cross in one hand and a sword hidden in the other. A samurai counselor bowed deeply. "My lord, there is harmony in the south. Kyushu has embraced them peacefully." Hideyoshi tapped the map where Kyushu lay his finger, cold as steel. And harmony can crumble fastest where people trust too easily. That winter word reached Nagasaki that Hideyoshi had issued the 1587 edict. Missionaries were to be expelled, all churches to be destroyed, Christian gatherings forbidden. The message arrived at dusk, carried by riders whose hardened expressions left no room for doubt. Haruto and Aki stood among the villagers as the scroll was read aloud by a trembling official. No preaching, no teaching, no foreign practices. All missionaries must leave Japan immediately under threat of death. A hush fell. Like heavy snow, someone whispered, "Will they take our chapel?" Another cried softly. "What about the songs?" Aki clutched Haruto's sleeve. "Brother, what will happen to Christmas?" Haruto swallowed hard, unable to answer. Inside the chapel, Father Xavier's companions lowered the candle flames. Kaito entered, with Ryoshin the monk both solemn. Father Kaito said quietly, "Is it true? Must you leave?" The old Jesuit nodded, eyes heavy. Hideyoshi fears we come with armies, but we brought only stories. Ryoshin placed a gentle hand on the Jesuit's shoulder. Fear grows quickest in winter, when the nights are longest. That evening, as snow thickened outside, the villagers gathered in the chapel for what might be their last open mass. The hymns were sung softly, the Latin words trembling like fragile snowflakes ready to melt. Aki leaned toward Haruto and whispered, "Why do they want to stop us from singing?" Haruto shook his head. Because sometimes, the world fears what it doesn't understand. In Shimabara Samurai, who once listened to hymns with curiosity, now switched to caution. "Do not let foreign teachings weaken your loyalty," one warned his men. "Keep your faith in your Lord and your land." Still, despite the growing tension, Christmas did not vanish. It simply changed shape. The following winter, villagers celebrated quietly inside their homes, doors shut, lanterns dimmed, voices hushed. Aki, holding a tiny nativity figure carved by Haruto, whispered, "We'll keep it safe. We won't let anyone take it." Haruto smiled weakly. "Hide it well. Somewhere warm." Families began wrapping nativity carvings inside old rice sacks, placing them beneath tatami floors or inside wooden boxes buried beneath the hearthstones. Paintings of the star were turned backward. Hymns were hummed instead of sung. Prayers were whispered at night when the wind howled loud enough to cover them. Christmas had not disappeared. It had gone into hiding. And as each year passed, the villagers felt the pressure grow. Patrols became stricter. Samurai questioned travelers more harshly. Rumors spread of missionaries captured or forced onto ships. One cold evening, as Haruto walked home through the snow, he overheard two passing soldiers. "They say some villages still gather secretly." "Let them," the other hissed. "If we find them, they'll regret it." Haruto's breath froze in his chest, colder than the winter air. When he returned home, Aki lit a small candle and whispered, "Will we still celebrate?" Haruto knelt beside her. "We will, but differently, quietly." Aki looked at the flame. "It's small," she said. "Small lights." Haruto replied, "Shine brightest in the dark." Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the footsteps of samurai patrols and softening the world with a blanket of white. Christmas in Kyushu had begun like a warm song carried on foreign winds. Now it was becoming a secret, a hidden ember protected by hearts fearful yet faithful. In the distance, the sound of temple bells rang through the cold night, not in celebration, but in warning. The era of gentle openness was ending. A harsher winter was coming, one where light had to survive behind closed doors. Winter swept across Japan once more. But this year, its cold carried a heavier weight, one that reached from the northern provinces all the way down to the familiar shores of Kyushu. A new shogun had risen, Tokugawa Ieyasu. His rule promised stability, order, and peace. But for the Christian communities of Japan, it brought the harshest winter they had ever known. In 1614, during a council meeting in Edo, Ieyasu signed a decree that would echo across every village, temple, and port in Japan. Christianity is hereby banned. Missionaries are to be expelled. Believers are to be punished. All symbols of the foreign faith are to be destroyed. When the edict reached Kyushu, it arrived not as gentle words, read by a trembling official, but through armored soldiers, temple banners, and government inspectors who marched with cold precision. At dawn, Nagasaki's streets filled with the clatter of sandals on stone as patrols announced, "By order of the shogun, all Christian practices are forbidden. Those who defy will face punishment by death." Haruto, now older but still living in the village near the harbor, felt his stomach knot as he listened. Aki, standing beside him, whispered with a trembling voice. They said, "Death." Haruto closed his eyes. I heard. Churches that once glowed with candlelight were now boarded shut. Some were burned, some were torn apart. The wooden chapel where Haruto and Aki first learned hymns was dismantled plank by plank, its nativity figures seized or shattered. Villagers hid in their homes as smoke curled into the winter sky. One evening, as snow fell like ash, Aki whispered, "It smells like something precious is disappearing." Haruto placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is." But the harshest order was yet to come. Patrols brought out small metal plates engraved with images of the Virgin Mary or Christ. Fumi-e, stepping images. Every villager was forced to step on the sacred image to prove they were not Christian. Samurai stood guard, eyes sharp, as villagers approached one by one. A man in the line trembled and whispered, I can't do it." His wife pressed his hand. You must live." "But if I step, it feels like my heart breaks." "And if you don't?" She cried softly, "Your body will break instead." When Haruto stood before the metal plate, he froze. He stared at the image, weathered, stained, but still familiar, like a memory of warm candlelight in a cold world. A soldier barked, "Step." Haruto didn't move. The soldier's hand tightened on his sword. Another soldier hissed, "Do it quickly, boy. Your hesitation is dangerous." Aki squeezed his arm. "Haruto, please." Her voice cracked like thin ice. Haruto stepped. His foot pressed against the cold metal. Something inside him felt like winter had pierced straight into his chest. And so it continued across Japan, thousands forced to trample what they once held sacred. Some complied trembling. Some hesitated. Some refused, and paid with their lives. Missionaries who had once sung hymns were dragged from hiding places, tied, and marched toward the harbors. Those who resisted were executed quietly in some places, brutally in others. Snow fell on the roads where missionaries once walked. Snow covered the broken remains of nativity carvings. Snow filled doorways where choirs once sang. Snow buried the steps of soldiers hunting believers. Christmas, once a fragile light in the Sengoku darkness, became a crime. Not merely discouraged, not merely unwelcome. A crime punishable by death. In the following winters, silence replaced song. No more hymns drifted through fishing villages. No candles glowed softly behind chapel windows. No bells chimed gently into the snowy night. But in some homes behind locked doors and shuttered windows, whispers survived. Aki lit a single hidden candle beneath the floorboards. "Just one," she murmured, "so the night isn't completely dark." Haruto knelt beside her. "If they find out." "They won't," she said, voice fragile but determined. "This is all we have left." He watched the tiny flame flicker, as soft as a heartbeat. "It used to be so bright," he whispered. "I remember," she replied. But even the smallest flame pushes back winter. In other villages, mothers taught their children a fragment of a hymn, just a melody, humming without words, so that if everything else was taken, at least the memory of warmth remained. Kaito, now a grown monk, sat at the temple steps watching snowfall. Ryoshin, older and frailer, sat beside him. Master Kaito whispered, "Why must the world fear what is gentle?" Ryoshin sighed. "Because gentle things change hearts more than swords ever can." Kaito looked out at the empty night. And now, everything is silent. Ryoshin closed his eyes. Even silence has memory. Japan, once touched by a winter light that felt foreign yet comforting, now plunged into a long, cold season where faith hid like a trembling ember beneath layers of fear. Christmas did not die, but it went deep underground, buried beneath snow, silence, and sorrow, waiting for a day when it could rise again. Winter descended upon Japan with a heavy, suffocating stillness, the kind of cold that did not simply cling to skin, but reached into bone. Snow piled on rooftops, gathered along stone walls, and masked the roads that connected villages across Kyushu. Yet beneath this quiet blanket, fear stirred like a restless shadow. A new shogun now ruled the land. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man who sought order above all else. But in his vision of a unified Japan, there was no place for foreign faiths, no room for stars born in foreign skies, no tolerance for winter stories carried from distant shores. And so, in 1614, the decree fell like a hammer, breaking ice. Christianity is banned throughout Japan. Missionaries are expelled. Believers will be punished. Any who resist shall face death. The message reached Kyushu at dawn. Soldiers marched through the snowy streets of Nagasaki, their armor clinking like cold iron bells, as an official unrolled the scroll and read the words in a voice that trembled despite his position. A hush deeper than winter itself settled over the crowd. Haruto listened, his hands cold inside his sleeves. Beside him, Aki's voice cracked. They said, "Death for believing." Haruto swallowed. Yes. Churches that once glowed warmly during Christmas Mass were torn down. Statues were smashed. Crosses were seized. Where nativity scenes had once stood, only piles of broken wood remained dusted lightly with snow. The chapel where Haruto Aki and the villagers learned their first hymns, where they once lit candles like small stars in a dark world, was dismantled board by board. Aki wept silently as soldiers carried away the carved nativity figurines. "They don't understand," she whispered. "They don't need to," Haruto said quietly. "They only follow orders." But the harshest practice arrived weeks later. Fumii. Officials brought out metal plates engraved with sacred images, Mary cradling the infant Christ. Each villager had to step on the image. If the soldier heard hesitation, if the foot trembled too long above the metal punishment awaited, a man in the line whispered to his wife, "I cannot do it. It is like stepping on my own soul." His wife clutched his hand. "If you don't, they will take you from us." When Haruto stood before the cold metal plate, he froze. The image looked worn, scraped by hundreds of feet, but still carried a faint warmth in its quiet expression. "Step," a soldier ordered. Haruto's heart pounded. Aki squeezed his arm, her voice breaking. "Please, please, Haruto. Live." He stepped. The metal was freezing, but not as cold as the feeling inside his chest. And so across Japan, thousands were forced to trample what they once cherished. Some survived, some resisted, some disappeared into the snow. Missionaries were dragged from hiding places tied with ropes and marched to the ports. Some were shipped away. Some were executed quietly. The winter winds carried their last prayers into an indifferent sky. For a time, all seemed lost. Christmas became a whisper, and whispers became dangerous. Then came the year 1637, a winter so harsh it cracked the earth itself. A winter poor farmers of Shimabara could no longer endure, crushed by taxes, hunger, and the relentless persecution of their hidden faith. Rumors spread like wildfire through blizzards. They've risen up in Shimabara. They march under a white banner. Some say it bears a cross. Haruto heard the whispers from fishermen fleeing ahead of storms. Kaito heard them from travelers seeking refuge in the monastery. Aki heard them from mothers warming their trembling children by the hearth. Shimabara, land of frozen soil, empty rice stores, and hidden believers pushed beyond the breaking point, was burning. Families fled to the ruins of Hera Castle, turning broken stone walls into a fortress of desperation. Inside, women carried water through snowdrifts. Children clung to their fathers' sleeves. Elders murmured prayers older than their fear. Yorikobi no koga umareta. A child of joy was born. A rebel leader shouted into the icy storm, "We have suffered enough. If we must die, we die with faith in our hearts." To many, this was not rebellion. It was the cry of people who wanted light in a world growing darker each year. But the Tokugawa response came swiftly. An army marched through snow like a tide of iron. Cannons rolled across frozen fields. Samurai, grim as winter guardians, surrounded Hara Castle. Haruto stood on a distant hill, watching smoke rise in the horizon. Aki approached, gripping her cloak. "Is that—" "Yes, Haruto," whispered. "And those flames, they are ending something," he said quietly, and burying it under snow. When Hara Castle fell, thousands were slaughtered: men, women, children, many secretly Christian. The shogunate declared, "Never again shall this foreign faith return. Never again shall Christmas be spoken of." After Shimabara, patrols increased in every village. Fumii tests became weekly. Homes were searched without warning. Even a hummed melody could be suspicion. One evening, Aki lit a tiny candle hidden beneath the tatami. "This is all we can do," she whispered. Haruto knelt beside her. It's barely a flame, but even the smallest flame, she murmured, can keep winter from swallowing us. Kaito, now grown, stood at the monastery steps. With the aging Ryoshin, snow drifted down like falling stars. "Master," he whispered, "will Christmas ever return?" Ryoshin sighed his breath, fogging in the cold. "Not soon," he said, "but winter never lasts forever." And so the festival that once filled Kyushu with candlelight and song became a crime, a secret, a memory. Christmas did not die, but it went underground, buried beneath silence and centuries of snow, waiting hidden like an ember under ice for a distant future where it could breathe again. Winter returned again and again, across the decades, each year, folding more deeply into silence. Under Tokugawa rule, churches had vanished, crosses had been burned, hymns forbidden, and Christmas, once fragile but bright, was now a crime. But faith once planted in a human heart does not disappear when roofs collapse or statues break. It hides, it whispers, it transforms. These were the Kakure Kirishitan, the hidden Christians of Japan. They lived in fishing villages, mountain hamlets, and remote islands where patrols grew infrequent. They spoke little, watched everything, and carried their faith like a secret flame, cupped between shaking hands in a storm. In Haruto and Aki's village, people no longer dared say the word Christmas, but they still remembered the cold night when the foreign priests told the story of a child born under a star. They remembered, so they preserved. Aki sat near the hearth one night, carving a tiny wooden figure. Its shape was vague, rounded, simple, with no distinct features. Haruto entered and froze. "Aki, it's dangerous to make that. It's not a child," Aki whispered softly. "It's just a winter spirit." She glanced at Haruto with gentle defiance. "And only we know what it really means." Objects became symbols, but symbols disguised themselves as everyday things. A small bowl marked with a star pattern. A wooden comb carved with 3 lines representing the Trinity. A tiny pouch embroidered with a circle of light hidden inside a kimono sleeve. Even the nativity scenes they once cherished were reimagined. Mary became a mother with no name. Joseph became a father figure with no identity. The baby became nothing more than a round, faceless charm. To an outsider, these were ordinary items. To the hidden Christians, they were sacred. At night, when the wind howled and patrols slept, families gathered behind closed shutters. Candles were forbidden too bright, so they lit only a single ember, cupped in an iron dish. From that faint glow, stories were passed down. Aki whispered to her young niece long ago, a child was born in winter. He brought warmth to the world. The child blinked. Where was he born? Aki smiled. Far away. But warmth travels far. Haruto joined them, lowering his voice. We call him the child of joy, but we never say his foreign name out loud. Understand? The niece nodded with solemn seriousness. I'll remember. In the mountains above the village, Kaito, now a wandering monk with a heart torn between two worlds, knelt in a small cave where villagers sometimes gathered in the deepest hours of the night. The air inside was cold and still, yet the cave had a strange warmth, like the breath of memories clinging to its walls. A few villagers arrived, cloaks drawn tight against the winter air. One whispered, "Shall we begin?" Kaito nodded. They bowed their heads, not daring to speak the old prayers openly. Instead, they recited chants that sounded like Buddhist sutras, but hidden inside the rhythm. The pauses, the melody, were fragments of forbidden prayers. It was faith in code, worship disguised as tradition. To a passing samurai, it was nothing more than rural chanting. To the Kakure Kirishitan, it was their Christmas Mass. A young man asked softly Kaito, "Is this allowed?" Kaito looked at the glow of the candle fragment before him. "No," he answered, voice steady. "But neither is forgetting." The villagers hummed the faint echo of a hymn. No words, only melody. The same hymn Xavier once taught them, decades earlier, now reduced to a fragile tune slipping between winter winds. Generations passed. Parents whispered stories to their children. Children, as they grew older, whispered the same stories to their own. No books, no statues, no records, only memory. Memory stronger than persecution. Memory stronger than winter. One evening, Aki, now older, her hair streaked with silver, sat with a circle of children around the hearth. "Listen," she said gently, "and I will tell you what my mother told me and what her mother told her." The children leaned closer. In a faraway land on a cold winter night, a miracle happened, and though we cannot speak it loudly, we carry it here. She placed her hand over her heart, and here, she touched the head of the youngest child. Haruto, sitting by the doorway, smiled quietly. Outside, snow fell like whispers, each flake a small promise that even the coldest night holds a hidden warmth. At times, the children asked Aunt Aki, "Will we ever celebrate openly again?" Aki looked at the flickering embers, her voice soft as falling snow. "Not in this season of our lives," she said. "But one day, someone will open the door that winter has closed." For now, Christmas lived in shadows, in chants disguised as sutras, in charms shaped like nothing yet, meaning everything, in prayers whispered into sleeves, in caves where the faintest ember danced, in lullabies hummed to sleeping children. It was no longer a festival, not a feast, not a gathering of light, but a memory passed in secret, shaped by fear, made fragile by silence, yet never extinguished. Because even in the deepest winter, somewhere hidden under centuries of snow, an ember still glowed. There is a special sadness that belongs only to traditions remembered, but no longer lived, a grief that feels like snow, settling silently on old wooden beams, beautiful, yet unbearably cold. For the hidden Christians of Japan, Christmas became exactly that, a winter festival no longer warmed by candles, no longer lifted by hymns, no longer celebrated with open hands or joyful hearts. It became a memory, a quiet ache lingering, like the faint scent of incense long after the flame is gone. In those long Tokugawa winters, when the wind howled through cracks in the walls and frost curled along the edges of papered doors, families would sit together in the dim glow of a covered ember, their faces half lit, half lost in shadow. And in that fragile light, the past seemed to hover around them like a ghost of warmth. Aki once whispered to Haruto, "Do you remember? The candles, how bright they were." Haruto nodded slowly, eyes lowered. "I remember the sound of singing, like warm breath in the cold." Aki smiled sadly. "We cannot sing now, no," Haruto murmured, "but we can remember." And so they did. The melodies that once rose proudly through the wooden beams of the chapel now returned only as broken hums barely audible beneath the sound of the wind. Words once spoken with reverence were now hidden inside chants, whose meanings only a few elders could decipher. Lights that had once danced in open celebration were replaced by embers hidden beneath iron bowls, their glow trembling like a secret heartbeat. Children grew up hearing stories of a winter star they were never allowed to draw, of a mother and child whose names they must never say, of a miracle they could know only as the night of joy, though no joy could be shown. Kaito, kneeling alone in a mountain cave, one winter night felt tears form in his eyes as he touched the cold stone floor. "So much has been lost," he whispered. The echo answered him with a lunch that filled the cave like snow, a silence that seemed to say, "Not lost, only hidden." Elders told stories, not with the excitement of old celebration, but with a soft melancholy that drifted through the room like frost-laden breath. They spoke slowly, carefully, offering each detail like a fragile treasure handed down from hands that shook under the weight of fear. And the children, even though they had never seen a real Christmas candle, felt something stir in their hearts, something warm and aching at once. For what could be more bittersweet than a festival remembered only by its absence? A celebration that survives only in whispers, a joy carried only in sorrow. Yet within that sorrow was a quiet kind of resilience, a softness, a determination as fragile and beautiful as the first snowflake of winter. For even though Christmas had become nothing more than a memory, that memory was enough to keep the ember alive. An ember that refused to die, no matter how hard the world tried to bury it beneath centuries of snow. Winter in Japan, during the mid-19th century, felt strangely familiar, yet subtly different. Snow still gathered along the tiled roofs of Nagasaki and drifted softly through the narrow streets. The wind still whispered through bamboo groves and rattled wooden shutters. But beneath that familiar cold, the rhythm of the nation was shifting. Something long frozen was beginning to thaw. For more than 2 centuries, Japan had closed its doors to the world. But foreign ships with tall masts and black hulls began appearing along the coasts, their flags fluttering like strange birds over icy waters. Western pressure mounted. Diplomacy demanded attention. Time itself seemed to push Japan toward a crossroads. The quiet, trembling candle of hidden faith, kept alive only through memory, was about to meet the light of a changing world. The end of isolation. In 1853, foreign fleets arrived in Edo Bay, their cannons aimed at the sky, their steel glinting under the winter sun. Villagers whispered black ships. Foreigners again. What do they want this time? The shogunate, long fearing outside influence, realized that isolation could no longer protect them. Winter winds carried tension across the country. Haruto, now an old man with silver hair, watched the shifting tides from the shoreline. Aki, wrapped in a thick winter scarf, stood beside him. Do you think Aki murmured that the world is opening again? Haruto nodded slowly. Yes. But where it opens, it may break. The Meiji Restoration, 1868. When the shogunate collapsed, a new era rose in its place, the Meiji era, a time of startling transformation. Japan modernized with breathtaking speed, railroads, telegraphs, gas lamps, factories, Western clothing, foreign schools, all spreading like spring blossoms, blooming after a centuries-long winter. With change came opportunity. Old restrictions were reviewed. Old fears began to crumble. And old laws, once carved in iron, began to melt like ice in sunlight. 1873. Christianity legalized again. One morning in the winter of 1873, a messenger rushed into Nagasaki carrying news that felt almost unreal. The ban, it is lifted. Christianity is legal again. The government has removed the prohibition. Haruto heard it from his grandson's excited voice as the boy ran into their home. Grandfather. They said it's allowed. The foreign faith is allowed now. Aki covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Haruto leaned on his staff, his breath unsteady. For all these years, he whispered, for all this silence. The winter finally ends. Hidden Christians emerge. For the first time in centuries, the Kakure Kirishitan, hidden Christians, stepped out of the shadows. It began quietly at first, a few elders walking slowly down mountain paths, their rosary-like prayer beads hidden in sleeves. Then more came. Families, villagers, the old, the young, the cautious, the hopeful. They walked toward newly opened mission churches built by foreign priests returning to Japan. Aki, leaning on Haruto's arm, approached the church doors with trembling steps. Haruto, she whispered, I never thought I would live to see this. Haruto smiled weakly. Neither did I. Inside, candles glowed openly for the first time in generations. Not hidden beneath bowls, not mixed with incense, not disguised as Buddhist or Shinto ritual. Real candles, bright, warm, free. Aki reached out toward a small nativity figure carved in European style, delicate, detailed, glowing in candlelight. It's different from ours, she murmured. Haruto nodded. Yes, but the feeling is the same. With the Meiji era came Western teachers, diplomats, and merchants. They brought their customs, their celebrations, their winter traditions, including Christmas. But the festival that returned to Japan was not the same secret, trembling version the hidden Christians preserved. Nor Was it the gentle, candlelit ceremony Xavier once introduced? It arrived modern, urban, colorful. Children in Western clothes sang cheerful carols. Shops decorated their windows with glass ornaments and red ribbons. Restaurants served foreign sweets. Hotels hosted winter banquets, lit by gas lamps instead of candles. Foreigners held public masses without fear. The Japanese, curious and open to modern culture, embraced Christmas anew, not as a forbidden faith, but as a joyful winter celebration. Haruto's great-granddaughter ran through the streets one December evening, pointing excitedly at a Western-style tree displayed in a merchant shop. "Grandfather Haruto, look, they call it a Christmas tree." Haruto, now fragile, leaned against the doorway, smiling gently. "It's brighter than anything we had," he whispered. Aki watched the children laugh and run. Her eyes softened as she murmured, "Christmas. It has returned, but in a new form." Haruto nodded. Like snow that melts and falls again. Never the same, but always familiar. By the late 19th century, Christmas in Japan became a blend of Western music, modern decorations, romantic winter nights, and echoes of an ancient faith preserved by devotion in darkness. It was no longer only religious, no longer hidden, no longer dangerous. It was a winter tradition, secular, festive, sparkling with lights, yet still carrying the faint heartbeat of the centuries-old Christmas, once whispered by flame and fear. On a quiet winter night, as snow fell softly outside, Haruto whispered his final thought. It survived. Even when we could not speak it, even when we feared it, even when it lived only as memory, it survived. Aki took his hand. It survived because light always finds its way back. And somewhere in a modern Meiji-era street, a choir of children began to sing Silent Night, Holy Night. The melody drifted through the cold air, filling the night with a warmth Japan had not known openly for centuries. Christmas had returned, not as it once was, but as it was meant to be, a light reborn after the longest winter. The Meiji era unfolded like a sunrise after an endless night. Streets brightened with gas lamps, factories hummed through the cold dawn, and Western fashions fluttered through the once silent alleyways of Nagasaki, Kobe, and Tokyo. Japan was remaking itself, stitching the old and new together in a single breath. And Christmas, once hidden underground, like a trembling ember, now reappeared with new vigor. But it was a different Christmas than the one Haruto and Aki remembered. Gone were the hushed gatherings in caves, the chants disguised as sutras, the tiny wooden figurines carved in secret. What returned was festive, public, and modern. Winter merchants hung bright red ribbons under gas lamps, their colors glowing against the snow. Bakery windows displayed European-style cakes, sweet, creamy, utterly foreign. Children stared in awe at the decorations. Haruto's great-granddaughter, Miyoko, pressed her hands against a frosted window and gasped. "Grandmother Aki, look, they baked a cake just for Christmas." Aki chuckled softly, adjusting her shawl. "When I was your age, child, we hid a single ember under a bowl and called it Christmas." Miyoko blinked. That doesn't sound fun. Aki smiled. It wasn't fun, but it was precious. Meanwhile, foreign residents in treaty ports held grand banquets illuminated by chandeliers, a light so bright that even the hidden Christians flinched at first, unaccustomed to such openness. Choirs performed public concerts, their voices ringing across city squares, lit with lanterns and early electric bulbs. In Tokyo, young couples admired Western-style shop displays. Christmas was slowly shifting into a celebration, not of faith alone, but of winter romance, modern joy, and cultural curiosity. Kaido, older now and walking with a cane, stood beside a foreign-built church one snowy evening. A missionary greeted him kindly. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to join our Christmas service?" Kaido smiled wistfully. "Your Christmas is bright," he said. The missionary tilted his head. "And yours?" Kaido looked at the falling snow. Mine was quiet, hidden, but it kept my heart warm in the coldest times. Children in Meiji Japan grew up believing Christmas was a joyful Western holiday, a time for cakes, candles, music, and love. They knew nothing of the years when people risked their lives for a whispered hymn. One night, Miyoko asked Grandmother Aki, "Is this how Christmas used to be?" Aki shook her head gently. "No, but every version of Christmas carries warmth. And warmth, that is all we ever needed." As Japan molded itself into a modern nation, Christmas transformed with it. It became a mirror reflecting Japan's evolving identity, part faith, part fashion, part romance, part memory. And yet, in all its forms, a single thread remained unbroken, the desire for light in winter. Years passed. Generations shifted like snow blown across rooftops. Cities grew taller, brighter, louder. And Christmas, the foreign festival that wandered into Japan centuries ago, found a permanent home, though no longer in the shape it once had. In modern streets, Christmas Eve became a night of shimmering lights. Couples walked beneath glowing decorations. Children unwrapped gifts. Shops played cheerful songs imported from distant lands. The warmth was vibrant, public joyful. But beneath the surface, in quiet corners of Japan, tiny traces of the old Christmas still lingered. In Haruto and Aki's village, now modernized, but still carrying the softness of its past, a small museum displayed a collection of items from the Kakure Kirishitan. A wooden carving with no features, a cloth embroidered with 3 faint lines, a chipped bowl marked with a small star. Visitors observed them curiously. A young boy asked the museum guide, "What are these toys?" The guide shook her head, smiling gently. "No. These are memories. Memories of a Christmas people could not celebrate openly." That night, Miyoko, now a grown woman, stood outside the museum, listening to faintly ringing bells from a nearby church. Her own children tugged at her kimono. "Mother, what did Christmas mean for great-grandfather Haruto?" Miyoko knelt beside them. For him, Christmas was a whisper. The children frowned. "A whisper?" "Yes," she said softly. "A whisper of hope when hope was dangerous." Snow began to fall, gentle flakes drifting through lamplight melting on her sleeves. The children lifted their hands, catching snow. Is this what Christmas felt like for them? Miyoko nodded. Snow was the same. Winter was the same. But their Christmas lived here. She touched her chest. In memories, in silence, in courage. Across Japan, Christmas had become many things. A commercial festival, a romantic evening, a family celebration, a cultural blend of East and West, a symbol of warmth in the coldest season. Yet for those who remembered or chose to learn, it was more than that. It was a story of endurance, of love in hiding, of songs never sung aloud, of candles that glowed under bowls, of faith protected like a fragile ember beneath centuries of snow. Late that Christmas Eve, Miyoko lit a small candle beside her window, not for religion, but for memory. Her children watched, puzzled. Why a candle? Mother Miyoko smiled. Because once long ago, our ancestors had no lights, no music, no freedom. They had only a tiny flame hidden in the dark. Tonight, we honor that flame. Outside, church bells rang. Inside, laughter from modern parties echoed down the street. But in Miyoko's home, silence settled warm, reverent, eternal. She whispered, a line passed down through generations, even when winter lasts long. Light returns. And in that moment, a thread stretching back to Haruto Aki Kaito Ryoshin and countless unnamed hidden Christians tightened gently, a line of memory glowing faintly through time. Christmas in Japan had changed, but the heart of winter, the longing for warmth, hope, and light had remained the same for nearly 500 years. And as snow continued to fall over the quiet village, it felt as though every flake carried the echo of that ancient winter, and the promise that no light once kindled is ever truly lost. As we reach the end of this long winter journey, we return just for a moment to that very first Christmas in feudal Japan. A wooden chapel glowing gently against the cold night. Villagers stepping carefully through freshly fallen snow. A Jesuit priest raising a candle in a land that had never seen Christmas light before. A hymn pronounced awkwardly, but with sincere hearts rising into rafters built by Japanese carpenters. Children listening with wonder to a story from across the sea, a child born under a bright star. That first celebration was small, but it was beautiful. Not because of spectacle, but because of unity. Because of curiosity, community, and the simple human longing for warmth in winter. But like many fragile beginnings, it didn't last. As we saw through the centuries that followed, the joy of Christmas dimmed into a long, uncertain twilight. Tokugawa edicts crushed chapels. Fumie cracked the hearts of believers. The Shimabara rebellion burned through the cold night. Families hid their nativity charms in floorboards. Hymns were disguised inside Buddhist rhythm and mountain wind. Christmas turned from a public celebration into a private ache. A festival carried not in lights or songs, but in memory. Yet in that quiet resilience, something extraordinary happened. The people who lived through those centuries of suppression kept the festival alive, not with grandeur, but with whispered prayers, hidden symbols, secret gatherings, and stories passed from mother to child. A festival once bright became a shadow, but a living shadow. A flame cupped carefully inside trembling hands. And remarkably, it never went out. This bittersweet legacy, joy transformed into silence. Silence, preserved as devotion, remains one of the most moving stories in the cultural history of Japan. And then, almost suddenly, the world shifted. The Meiji Restoration opened Japan's doors. Foreign merchants returned. Missionaries returned. Teachers, diplomats, engineers, scholars, voices from everywhere stepped onto Japanese soil. Christianity was legalized again in 1873. The hidden Christians stepped blinking into the light after 250 years underground, and Christmas began a new life. But the Christmas that emerged was no longer the same festival that Xavier introduced. It had evolved first in hiding, then in modernity. Today, Christmas in Japan is luminous, lively, and uniquely Japanese. It is secular, romantic, joyful, shaped by lights, decorations, gift-giving, winter dates, song, and celebration. Couples walk under glowing illuminations. Families enjoy Christmas cake. Cities shine with elaborate displays. Shops play cheerful foreign carols as snow flurries drift past neon signs. And even though the religious meaning is distant for many, the essence remains light in winter warmth, in cold togetherness in the darkest season. In this way, Christmas continues not as a sacred ritual alone, but as a cultural celebration of humanity's shared longing for joy, companionship, and hope. The festival Xavier once held with frightened but curious villagers, and the festival the Kakure Kirishitan once protected in caves, has become a symbol woven into Japan's modern life. As we close this story, one truth becomes clear: human traditions endure. Even under fierce oppression and silence, people find ways to protect the things that warm their hearts. Christmas in Japan endured when it had no right to. It survived political bans, war, isolation, and persecution. It lived through centuries without churches, without priests, without books, and without freedom. It survived purely because people believed in its light. And today, that light shines openly again, transformed but alive. A symbol not only of religion, but of resilience, of the human spirit's ability to guard warmth in the coldest moments of history. So, as we end this journey across 5 centuries, imagine one final montage: a monk lighting a hidden ember in a cave, a mother whispering a forbidden prayer into her child's ear, a village staring in wonder at the first Christmas star carved by Japanese hands, the banners of Shimabara fluttering in a blizzard, the Meiji streets decorated with Western lamps, and finally, modern Japan, glowing with millions of winter lights, bright as a sky full of stars. From feudal chapels to hidden caves, from forbidden prayer to neon illuminations, Christmas in Japan is a story of light that refused to die. May we carry that light with us through every winter, through every silence, through every era of change. Because in the end, the human heart always finds a way back to warmth. And now, as the winter night deepens and the final echoes of our story settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, I invite you to gently close the chapter of this evening. Let the weight of the blankets pull you closer to warmth. Let the soft rhythm of your breath steady itself like falling snow. And let the centuries-old journey we shared drift softly into dream. Tonight, you have traveled through forgotten winters, from the first candlelit chapels of Kyushu to the silent caves of the hidden Christians, to the glowing city lights of the Meiji era, to the modern illuminations that shimmer across Japan today. You have walked through fear, hope, silence, and rebirth. You have watched a tiny spark of Christmas light flicker through darkness and survive. And now, as the world around you grows still, that same gentle light can rest in your heart. So, dear viewer, I wish you a peaceful night. May the cold winds outside your window remind you of ancient winters long past, while the warmth in your room reminds you that even the smallest flame can guide you through the dark. May your dreams be soft like drifting snow over quiet streets. May they carry the sound of distant bells, the shimmer of candles, and the memory of voices that once sang in secret, holding on to hope when the world seemed determined to extinguish it. And as you drift into sleep, let me offer you a blessing for this season. May your Christmas be gentle. May your night be restful. May your heart find peace in the stillness. And may your life, no matter how cold its winters may be, always discover a path back to light. Wherever you are, whoever you are watching this tonight, thank you for sharing this journey. Thank you for giving your time, your curiosity, your imagination. You are part of this story now, a listener who carries its light forward. So rest well. Let your thoughts quiet, let your breathing soften, and let the warmth of this winter tale settle into your dreams. From my voice to your heart, I wish you a calm night, a gentle sleep, and a truly blessed Christmas. May you wake tomorrow with lighter thoughts, a clearer spirit, and a little more warmth than before. Good night, and Merry Christmas. May peace be with you tonight and always.